In this video we're going to have a look at creating a animated sting for a Doritos commercial. Now we're actually going to use an existing bit of footage here. Here it is. It's a little Doritos sting, and we've got a few elements. It goes for just over 2 seconds, and I have the folders available for you all. We do need to sort of have a look at what is involved in this. So I do have a copy of what is essentially a breakdown sheet, and it's just going to look at some of the elements as we go through the animation. So let's find our animation here, Doritos intag logo.mp4, and there it is there. It's quite quick. And I'm actually going to open this up in After Effects eventually. You can open up in Photoshop and get the timeline happening there. But some of the elements that I've done is I've just sort of drawn in the logo, how it sort of needs to be, and I'm just trying to make sure I'm familiar with some of the elements. Also had a look at the time frames that it's taken to break it down. So I've put in an application such as Photoshop, where I've been able to look through and go, oh, okay, at 1 second and X amount of frames, when is a certain thing happening. I've also time coded this. So for example, the triangle, and let's open this up with QuickTime for example. If we scrub through this slowly, so the triangle actually starts forming, and it basically forms from the 0 to 0.3, and that's when it sort of fades from complete black. So black until about 3 frames is when we first start seeing that to form. Other things like the Doritos logo, if you actually play around with the contrast, you can actually see it is actually there, and this is the Doritos logo that's forming in the background, and it's moving forwards, as is this for the bold bit of text here. And what else have we've got? We've got things like this spark effect, and that is forming over here on the right, and gradually it is moving out to 1 point, 2 point, back to 3, and sort of terminating here. We've got some lightning effects as we scrub through. They're kind of just sort of creeping through with that, and we've also got some nice little particle effects as well. And if you also look really closely, there is kind of like a reddish black cloud going through, and also we have a dark to light, and also red overlay thing happening, sort of a lens flare happening over the text as well, and some glowing effects and stuff like that. So it is kind of important that we know what we're doing and where the placing is of each of those, and I've tried to sort of get them down roughly, so when it comes to animating these, we're going to get fairly close with that and close that down. Now the bulk of this is going to be done in After Effects. One of the things we do need to look at doing is After Effects works really well integrated with Photoshop. So Photoshop's a great one for creating the assets, and what I've done here, I'm just going to close off the timeline here because we don't need to see that, is I've broken apart the elements directly from the endpoint of the logos. This is the finished component here. So I've built these assets ready to go. We essentially have a for the bold section here. Now this isn't the actual font. I've sort of come up with one that's slightly similar. I've also put a stroke layer on there in black and orange gradient as well. We've got the Doritos tag, and we've also got that little triangle. So 3 separate layers. They're all going to be animated separately, but they are the main components that are going to be our assets for that. So that's great that they're in there, but we're actually going to just take them into After Effects anyway. So I'm going to start up After Effects and give it a few moments while it starts up. And ordinarily what we want to do in After Effects is we want to build our composition based on what we want as far as resolution, what format we're going to be building this in. So as we first ignore that, need to clean up the computer, and that's also going to have some previous stuff. So ordinarily when we start off afresh, we'll have the option new composition from footage, new composition. If we're starting something brand new from scratch, we could go to new compositions, got some presets. we're actually just going to start something from a bit of composition. I'm going to go new composition from footage. The other option is we can go to composition and go to new composition up here, and that will give us the same situation there. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm actually going to open up the Doritos N-Tag logo MP4, and of course this is the original video folder. We've got some options down here, all acceptable files. It's coming in as an AVI, but you know, that's fine. I'm going to hit create composition down here, and what that's going to do is as soon as I press open, it's going to load it up here, and here's our project window. Let me maximize this. Here's our project window. This shows the elements that we currently have, and at the moment all we have is the comp, or the composition, which is the N tag, and it is placed it down here. So this is the actual AVI here. This is our composition. You can see this logo here, and this is what is going on over here. So it's always going to refer back to that. And if I scrub through, we've got our timeline. It is set to exactly how long that bit of video footage is. It also is the correct ratio, the correct size, and everything. So essentially it's going, hey, that's our starting point. Let's build a video from that. Now let's have a quick look at our interface. So this is in our project window. This is where all our assets are going to be built up, and over here down below, this is our timeline. So our layers are going to be here. Those of you familiar with Photoshop will see some blend modes and stuff like that. They are going to come into play a bit later, and there's a few extra buttons here. Please note the bottom left corner, the very bottom left corner, there are some view options along here, and depending on which ones you have turned on or off, you can have multiples turned on and off. It's going to show you certain amounts of information. So I'd recommend just having the far right expand or collapse layer switches pane turned on, and let's also turn on the next one, expand or collapse, so it's got our blend modes. Alright, here's our timeline. We can scrub across here. As we scrub across, this is our playhead marker. You'll notice that the numbers over here are going to change, and this is actually showing us our position in time. If we look below, it says 24 FPS, 24.00 frames per second. That's our composition settings at the moment, and we're currently at 1 second and 24 frames, and there it is there. Now you can zoom in on this. We have a little mountain range option down here, and you can either manually click in and zoom, or you can click the icons and it will start zooming into that position to the point where you can actually see individual frames. And remember, this one at the moment, there are 24 individual frames that make up every second. This composition's only about 2 seconds, and let's go to the end, 2 seconds and 14 frames long. So I'm going to reduce that. We don't need to see the fine details at the moment. There's our entire composition right there. I'm going to drag this right to the beginning, to the 0 point. Great, let's get some other assets in here. So I'm going to go to File, Import, File, and I'm going to find the document that I'm going to be using, and the document for this is going to be the PSD, Doritos Animation Assets.psd. It's a Photoshop document. It's enable all acceptable files. It looks like it's accepting it, saying it's format import as footage. Now we don't want to bring it in as footage. It is not a video sequence or anything like that. It's a selection of layers. I'm going to go composition. I don't want to create a composition, so I'm going to untick that. And it's not a Photoshop sequence, so it's not a sequence of images. And I'm going to hit open. This little window is going to pop up here, and it's going to say, alright, what do we want to do with this? We want editable layer styles, and it's going to be matching Photoshop appearance, and that generally works. So I'm just going to click through and click it in there. And if we have a look at our project folder here, we now have a composition of that, as we did with the N tag. We don't actually want to use the composition, we want to actually use its assets. So in this folder, Doritos Animation Assets, Layers, if I do the drop down there, there are our 3 layers, and you can actually see there's a preview up in the window here. We've got the triangle, we've got the for the text and the Doritos text, and you can expand this window out as required, and you can see there's some extra information there, but for the most part this will usually work. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that whole folder and I'm going to drag that down into my timeline over here on the left. And if I scrub through, well, I can still see my Doritos logo, but I can't see these layers underneath. And the simple fact is that this is a solid layer. So you can see if I move that across there, obviously we're not seeing through that. Now I do want to keep this in front. We're going to be using this as a reference point. This is the original video, and we're going to use this as a reference point to make sure that our animation's kind of tying in together with that. So I'm actually going to turn the visibility of that off. I'm going to poke this little eye icon and turn that off, and there we can see our layers. So we've got first up we've got the Doritos, great. We've got for the bold, great, and we've got the triangle. Now this is mainly in the correct order. I'm actually going to bring the for the bold and drag that just above the Doritos. Now it doesn't actually it's probably not going to make much difference, but it's good to know that you can do that. And in the animation, this one actually does animate slightly differently. Awesome. Now the background is white, so that's kind of off-putting at the moment. Let's make it a bit more clear and create a new background layer. So I'm going to go up the top here to Layer, New, and I'm going to go over to Solid. Here it is. Its current name is Black Solid. I'm going to call this BG for background, and I'm going to leave all of these. These are basically going to fit this to the size of the composition. Color is by default black, and I'm happy with that, but if need be you can change the color of it. And I'm just going to hit OK, and there it is there, BG. It's at the top. I'm going to drag that down right to the bottom there, and there it is there. So now we have our elements for the bold, Doritos, and the triangle. And now we can start playing around and looking at animating this kind of stuff. Cool. So let's look at animating them. As we scrub through, we're going to notice our time over here. Now I'm going to actually refer to this document, and specifically I'm going to look at the logo and the logo for the bold, so these two logos here, and they both sort of start at the very beginning. I played around with the levels on this, and they do actually start in the beginning, just the entire area is faded out, and then at about 1 second and 12 frames, so it's about 1.5 seconds, they have increased in size, so they've moved forwards towards us to the point where they are at their maximum size. And at the moment this is their maximum size. This is how big they should be in comparison to our Doritos logo, and there it is there. So slight variation. This is our animation. It's got effects on it and stuff like that. So great, but you know, that's going to work for us. Excellent. So let's figure that out. Now, as I mentioned with here, at roughly at about the 1 second and 12 frame mark, that's just when it reaches its full potential. At 0, it is at its smallest point. So while we've got it at its maximum, let's start getting that in place. So at 1 second and 12 frames, I'm actually going to, you can scrub across here to get to that, and keep an eye on this marker over here, 111, 112. The other option is to actually double click in here and manually type in the time code that you want, press enter, and it will jump directly to that point. Excellent. So at this point, at 1 second and 12 frames, both these texts are at the size they are now. So I'm going to lock that in, and I want to do that with both the size and the position. So they are moving slightly, but they also are scaling and getting bigger. So let's start with scale, and I'm going to hit S with 1 selected. I'm going to go scale, and a little drop down appears with a stopwatch. Now as soon as I click into that stopwatch, we create a keyframe. The keyframe is based on that particular layout, its size at that time in this time frame, and it creates a keyframe. Now we can delete, move, and duplicate keyframes if we want, but for now that's good. I'm also going to change the position, so I'm going to hit P, brings up position, and I'm going to hit the stopwatch for that. So both the position and the scale are now locked in place for there. If I move to another part of the time frame and change any of those, it will animate accordingly. I'm going to close or minimize that. I'm going to go to the Doritos. That's the text there. And I'm going to show you a different way of getting to these. Now, if we move across to the left here, there's a little drop down arrow. There it is there. We then see transform. And we have some other options: anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. And I'm going to lock in position and scale. So there is a drop down, or you can use the shortcut P for position, S for scale. This does get a little bit more complex when we start having effects and other things, masks and all that sort of thing. You will get more and more drop downs, and it will get quite large and get a bit more complicated to find things. But for our basic stuff, position, scale, and transparency, they're a good one to remember. And they are both locked in place. If I do the drop down here, you should be able to see that there they are, both the position and scale for both of those. Awesome. Now I'm going to move my slider to the 0 point. So now I'm actually going to reduce the size of this text to where its starting point is. Now I can't actually see where that is at the moment. I need to reference my Doritos video, so I'm going to turn that back on. I'm going to scrub across until I can actually start seeing the text, and it kind of starts appearing about there is where I can start seeing it. It starts forming, but it's a bit hard to see, and depending on the brightness in your room and all that. Now I'm going to start putting some markers in this so I can try and build my text accordingly. Now by default we don't have any guidelines in here, so let's create some. I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to go to Show Rulers. You can go Command R. This will bring up some rulers here, and I'm going to use these as a guideline. I'm going to click up in our rulers up here, and I'm going to drag this down. Now this R, letter R, is kind of the big one that's jumping out for me, so I'm going to move these rulers down to the top and the bottom of the R, and also move to where I believe the beginning and the end of the R are 2 R's. So something like that. I also have a reference for the other text that comes up, so I'm going to move those markers in there as well, above and below, and I'm just going to move to sort of the end point where I think the D from bold is. So this is a good option here. Now one of the things you do want to make sure you do as well, which can be quite handy, is you want to turn off snap to grid if that is on. I've turned mine off previously, but if you do notice it starts really sticking, do turn snap to grid off for this, otherwise it gets a bit finicky. Okay, great. So that's getting closer, and as we can see it gets larger from there. So I'm going to bring my timeline back to 0. I'm going to turn that video layer off. There's my Doritos. Let's move the for the bold first. So there's the for the bold one. We can use our move arrow here, selection tool, and I'm going to move and see if I can shift that around. I'm going to use my arrow keys just to tap it in place a little bit. And don't forget to zoom in, Command plus, just to make sure you get a good view. And of course space bar to bring up your hand. And let's just fit that in a little bit more. Again, I'm just nudging it using the arrow keys. So that's kind of getting there. And you'll notice, even though I haven't activated anything already, this position, because the stopwatch was turned on here, it's already locked that in. Scale wise, we can also grab that and scale it. Scaling's on the outside, but we're going to have to jump in here and try and scale this manually. Now you can manually type in the numbers for scaling here. You can link them so that they both scale proportionately, or you can click and drag on those numbers and you can actually see it starts scaling. Now this means we may have to remove it again and then maybe scale again and then remove and maybe just a little bit more. Okay, so that's kind of getting there. 56. Yeah, that kind of works. Great, so I'm going to zoom out. Remember Command negative to zoom out on your screen. There we go. And now I'm going to jump and move to the Doritos one. Now obviously I don't need to do the drop down for this. They are activated, but I'm going to leave it there anyway. And again, I've put this marker in for the letter R, so I'm going to place this in here. Scale. Let's bring that down a bit. Let's move that up. Now I do believe there's kind of a what we call a stroke over this text, so I'm just going to try and get it roughly to where I think it should be, given that there will be a stroke. So I'm going to make it slightly smaller than it needs to be, or what it appears to be, and if you watch the animation you'll probably see where that is. So I'm just going to fudge it in there, and there it is there. And what we should be able to see, if I zoom out again, I'm going to hit spacebar to play. We can see, depending on the processing, you can see it'll run through. Let it run through once and you'll get an idea. And then we've just got that little increase in size for there. You can might be able to hear the crunching sound from the background. So there, that's basically it. That's getting our very, very basic animation coming in. Now there's other things we can do. We can do easy and ease out, but we'll worry about that at a later point. I'm going to clear out these guidelines. I don't need them anymore, so I'm going to go to View and go to Clear Guides, and then we get back to that, so that way they're not in the way at all. Cool.